The sun was only a faint silver promise over the mesas when Rhett Calloway spotted the dark figure in the snow. Morning hung quiet and pale, the desert wrapped in white, a rare, almost holy sight in the Arizona winter. He reined his horse near the frozen creek, listening. Only the wind answered. Then came the faintest sound, a gasp, then a voice trembling through the stillness. "Easy. It hurts." He froze. It was a woman's voice, weak and raw. She lay half buried in frost, her dark hair tangled with ice, her breath hitching like it might stop any second. Her clothes were torn and dusted with snow, her wrists scraped raw from rope. Apache, he thought. The word brought a ghostly echo of gunfire, of raids and nights spent burying friends. But that was long ago, before the quiet years, before loneliness began to hurt worse than bullets. He dismounted, boots sinking into slush. She stirred at the sound, tried to crawl backward, eyes wild as a cornered fawn. "Don't move," he said softly, his voice rasping from disuse. "You'll freeze faster that way." Her lips trembled, but she didn't fight when he lifted her. She weighed next to nothing, but her shivering seemed to fill the world. He wrapped her in his buffalo coat, feeling her heartbeat hammer weakly against his chest. The ride back to the cabin was silent, except for the hiss of wind and the creak of leather. Rhett's thoughts moved slower than the snowflakes falling around them. He hadn't meant to care. He hadn't meant to look human again. But something about the way she clung to life with broken fingers reminded him of himself. Inside the cabin, he laid her near the hearth. The fire had gone out during the night. He built it back quickly, the flint sparking to life like an old friend. When warmth began to return, she opened her eyes, startlingly dark, like wet earth after rain. Her gaze darted between him and the door, measuring danger. "You're safe," he said. It sounded strange in his own mouth, like a word too good for this place. She tried to sit up, grimaced, then whispered, "Why?" Her accent laced each syllable with music. He poured water from the kettle, handed it to her. "Because you'd have died out there." She studied him as though unsure which fate she preferred, but she drank cautious sips. The cup trembled in her hands. He noticed the marks on her wrists again, thin, cruel circles. Somebody had tied her. When she drifted to sleep, Rhett sat by the fire, listening to the wood pop and sigh. It had been years since he'd heard another person's breathing inside these walls. The sound was unsettling, almost too human. He leaned forward, staring into the flames, and thought of his brother. Buried under the cottonwoods after an Apache raid. Hatred had burned hot back then, bright enough to light every decision he'd made. Now, only ashes remained, and the weight of silence. By dusk, she woke again. Snow beat against the windows in soft fists. She asked for her satchel. He'd found none. Her name, when she spoke it, was Nayeli. It meant "I love you" in her tongue, she said quietly, then looked away as if ashamed of the word. Rhett didn't ask who had hurt her. He only passed her a bowl of stew and said, "Eat." She obeyed, every bite a small battle. The silence between them was thick but not empty. It carried the uneasy truce of two worlds forced under the same roof. When the wind howled, she flinched. He saw how her shoulders shook, and without thinking, he placed another log on the fire, slow and deliberate, so she could watch his hands and know he meant no harm. Later that night, while she slept, Rhett stood by the window, watching snow drift across the dark fields. Somewhere out there, he knew, tongues would wag. Calloway's taken in one of them. Fools gone soft. The town had long memories and short mercy. He'd lived with their whispers since his brother's death. He should have fought harder, not walked away. They'd never forgiven him for choosing peace. Now they'd have another reason to spit his name. Still, when morning came, he saddled his horse and rode to town for medicine. The general store went silent as he entered. Sheriff Mercer's stare pinned him from the counter. "You out here on business, Calloway?" "Medicine," Rhett said simply. "For who?" Rhett didn't answer. He paid and left, feeling their eyes on his back all the way to the door. When he returned, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and something else. Hope. Faint, but there. Nayeli sat near the fire, mending his torn glove with careful fingers. The sight stopped him cold. He hadn't asked her to. She didn't even know whose it was. Yet, the gesture felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. He set the medicine on the table. "You shouldn't be moving much." She didn't look up. Hands remember work even when hearts forget. Her English was halting but true, and the sentence stayed with him long after. Days passed. Snow piled against the door. The two of them lived in a quiet rhythm. The scrape of spoons, the creak of the rocking chair, the muted crack of wood splitting. Nayeli helped where she could, feeding the mare, sweeping the floor. Sometimes, she hummed softly, melodies from her homeland that wound through the air like smoke. He never asked her to stop. But one morning, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the peace. Rhett opened the door to find a crude message burned into his barn door. Savage lover. The words cut deeper than any knife. He said nothing to Nayeli, though she saw the way his jaw tightened. That night, as the wind moaned against the cabin walls, she asked, "Why do they hate us?" He hesitated. They hate what they don't understand. And you? Do you hate? He stared at the fire until it blurred. Used to. What changed? He met her gaze, and the answer rose like something long buried. I got tired of being cold. For a while neither spoke. Then, with hesitant grace, she reached for the glove she'd mended and placed it beside him. Her fingers brushed his, just once, enough to still his breath. "Keep warm," she said simply. Outside, snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness. Inside, the silence between them began to thaw. Rhett watched her as she curled near the fire, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her. Something inside him shifted. Not desire, not yet, but a fragile stirring, like spring beneath frost. He went to the window again, looking out at the endless white. Somewhere beyond the hills, the world waited with all its cruelty and noise. But for this night, in this small patch of winter light, Mercy had found a place to rest. Rhett closed the shutters, stoked the fire, and sat back down. Nayeli murmured something in her sleep, a word in Apache he couldn't understand. It sounded like a prayer. He whispered without thinking, "It'll be over soon." But in his chest, he felt the opposite, the strange, quiet certainty that something had only just begun. And as the snow buried the tracks outside, the cabin's windows glowed against the dark, holding a secret no wind could carry away. Morning came muted and gray, the kind of cold that stiffens thought itself. Rhett awoke to the quiet hum of snow sliding from the roof. The fire burnt low. Nayeli was already awake, wrapped in a shawl, feeding the embers back to life. The scar on her arm had faded to a pale thread, but her eyes carried a restless shadow. Each day she seemed more herself, and less safe to be. The world outside their walls had grown louder in its silence. He felt it in the air when he rode to the creek for water. The absence of birds, the echo of hoofprints not his own. Gossip moved faster than winter wind in a small town. Somewhere, voices were gathering, sharp with judgment and the smell of whiskey. By noon, a faint trail of smoke on the far ridge caught his eye. Too straight, too steady for a traveler's camp. His chest tightened. He knew what it meant. He went back inside, hung his hat by the door, and met Nayeli's questioning glance. "Men are coming," he said quietly. She froze, then looked toward the window. "For me? Maybe for me. Doesn't much matter." He poured coffee that neither of them drank. The cabin felt smaller than ever. Wind hissed through the gaps in the boards like a warning. Rhett checked his rifle, not from fear but from habit, then set it back against the wall. "They think kindness is weakness," he said after a long silence. "They'll come to test it." Nayeli's voice trembled, though her words did not. "You should send me away." He shook his head. "No one should run from their own home." She stood, the firelight soft against her face. "You said Mercy can live here," she whispered. "Let it live still." Before he could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drowned her words. 3 riders. Their shadows stretched long and thin over the snow. Rhett stepped outside as they stopped 10 yards from the porch. Sheriff Mercer sat at the front, his coat dusted with frost, his eyes narrow beneath the brim of his hat. Behind him were 2 deputies, men who looked at the world like it owed them a fight. "Morning, Calloway," Mercer said, voice hard as gravel. "Heard you're keeping company that don't belong here." Rhett stood still, the snow creaking beneath his boots. "You heard wrong. Then let's see for ourselves." Mercer's horse stamped and snorted. "Town's uneasy. A man like you should know better than to stir ghosts." Rhett's hand hovered near the rifle propped against the porch rail, but never touched it. "She's hurt, Sheriff. Healing." Mercer's lip curled. "Ain't our kind's job to heal theirs." From the doorway, Nayeli appeared, wrapped in her shawl, head held high. Her presence stilled the air. The deputies shifted, uncomfortable. She spoke quietly, her English halting but clear. "I mean no harm. I only wish to live." Mercer's gaze hardened. "You don't belong among us, girl. Then who do I belong to?" she asked. No one answered. The question hung between them like smoke. Rhett felt something old inside him crack. The years of silence, of keeping his head down while the world built fences of hate around itself. He stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "She stays," he said. "You'll ride back and tell your men there's nothing here worth fighting." Mercer laughed once, a sound without mirth. "You've gone soft, Calloway. You forget what they took from you?" Rhett's hand trembled at his side, but not with anger, with clarity. I forget nothing, he said. That's why I won't let it happen again. One of the deputies spat into the snow. She ain't worth dying for. Rhett's reply came gentle as a prayer. Maybe she's worth living different for. The words seemed to unsettle even the wind. For a heartbeat, the world was utterly still. Then Mercer's temper broke. He yanked the rifle from his saddle. Nayeli gasped. Rhett stepped between them before he knew he'd moved. A shot split the air. The sound echoed through the valley like thunder over glass. Nayeli stumbled backward, clutching her arm. Blood darkened her shawl. Rhett caught her before she fell. Stay with me, he whispered. Easy now. Her eyes fluttered open, pain and memory mingling. Easy, it hurts, she murmured. The same words she'd spoken the day they met. Rhett turned back toward Mercer, but his fury had no place to go. The sheriff's rifle lowered, shame flickering through his face like firelight through smoke. No one moved. Only the snow fell, slow and endless. I'll take her inside, Rhett said at last. And when spring comes, you'll remember what you almost became. Mercer looked at the girl, then at Rhett, and something in his jaw softened. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode away. The deputies followed, their shapes fading into the pale horizon. Inside the cabin, Rhett tore strips from a sheet and bound her wound. The bullet had grazed flesh, nothing worse. Still, his hands shook. She caught one between her own, blood-smudged fingers pressing warmth into his skin. You shouldn't have stood in front, she said faintly. He smiled without humor. Couldn't think of a reason not to. For hours they sat in silence, the storm outside thickening to a white wall. It was as if the whole world had been washed blank. When night fell, she began to hum again, the same song that had once drifted through the firelight. Rhett listened, eyes closed, and let it fill the spaces where fear used to live. Something new took root in its place. Not love yet, not something he could name, but a deep, steady belonging. Days turned. The wound healed and the snow began to melt. The river whispered again under its shell of ice, as if the land itself were waking. Rhett repaired the fence posts by the pasture. Nayeli fed the horses, her laughter now unguarded. When she moved through the yard, the sunlight clung to her hair like forgiveness. He rode into town once more for supplies. The stares followed him as always, but there was something different in them this time. An uneasy respect, maybe, or just the confusion of men who'd seen mercy and couldn't unsee it. The sheriff tipped his hat without a word. When Rhett returned, the valley was alive with dripping snow and birdsong. Nayeli was tending a patch of ground near the porch, planting early seeds with careful hands. He dismounted, watching her. She glanced up, smiling shyly. Spring comes slow here, she said. But it comes. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The world smelled of wet earth and smoke. He felt, for the first time in years, that the air itself was forgiving him. That evening, they sat outside the cabin as dusk folded over the hills. The fire inside crackled, its light spilling warm across their faces. Neither spoke. There was nothing to explain. Everything that mattered had already been said between silences. As the stars climbed, Nayeli whispered, "When snow melts, will you send me away?" Rhett shook his head. "When snow melts, you can choose where to go. But you won't have to run." She looked out toward the horizon. "Then maybe I'll stay till the flowers bloom." He smiled. That'd be a fine thing. For a long while they simply listened. The soft rush of the thawing stream, the faint cry of coyotes far beyond the ridge, the beating of two hearts learning the same rhythm. And when the fire sank to embers, the old ache in Rhett's chest felt smaller, as if it had found its place in the world again. Mercy had not broken him. It had remade him. Later, the narrator's voice, older, tender, reflective, seems to rise like the wind through pines. They said kindness was weakness, but maybe it was the only strength worth carrying. Maybe the wild itself needed gentleness to stay alive. The last image lingers. The cabin haloed in twilight, smoke curling upward like a prayer. A man and a woman sitting side by side as winter finally releases its hold. Their story ends not in triumph, but in quiet survival, the kind that keeps the world turning. And somewhere beyond the screen of falling night, the same voice whispers one final truth. If this tale warmed you, traveler, stay a while. There are more stories buried in this snow. Subscribe and let the West keep whispering its heart to you.